trying to defend. Loaded. How could you do it to
all? My name is Mr. Moose. I am joined by the one and only Kendo, and this is the XLNC Light League week number 2. Before we get any further, Kendo, how you doing today, man?
I mean, I'm feeling great. I get to bring a new perspective into my casting career, and that is talking a little bit about Summoner's Rift. There isn't too many characters in the Rocket League realm that I am used to, so now all of a sudden I have indoctrinated myself in lore. I may or may not have invested in a Teemo hat, forgive me, but we are going to be having plenty of fun here on the Rift, and I'm hoping to bring a brand new perspective to the Light League.
Oh, I'm so happy, man. It was a ton of fun last week. Shoutouts as well to Axeman stopping in and making sure that everything was running smoothly. But Kendo, it's going to be me and you, man, for the league, for the split. And we're going to be running back and forth. It's going to be, I think, a real ton of fun. I love your glasses, man. A shout out to the nice red hot fire, the drip that you've got, as it were, on your eyes. Super cool to see, most definitely. But yeah, like I said, this is week number 2. We're going to get into Divine Ascension Obsidian up against VBU Neon. Should be a really fun day, especially, with both of these teams wanting to be able to keep their ranks in the standings pretty high. But before we get into that, we want to talk a little bit more about last week. So we should be pulling up a little bit of some stat sheets, some things pulling out in just a moment. Kind of take a look at what we've got here. Now, remember, this is week number 1. So there's not really a lot of, a lot of data. I guess you could say 3 games from each player to go off of. But so far, Kendo, I mean, you've got some really interesting dynamics that are coming through, not only with the picked and banned champions, Viego and Trundle, but then also with a ton of different teams having players in the top of the charts, depending on where you're at.
Yeah, it was an extremely interesting dynamic week number 1. And the one thing that we don't see right off the top, the other most picked champ happened to be Xin Zhao. You throw in the fact that Trundle had an amazing week and Xin Zhao had pretty much the polar opposite a week throughout the Rift. That was an interesting stat to behold. But Common Taco had themselves a day in week number 1 here last Tuesday, and it was quite a sight to behold. The KDA setting some high records, the amount of deaths per game as well. Imagine a world where you can play 3 straight games and average just over 1 death. That is insane.
Oh, yeah, he had some, really good games against Degenerates Ascension. I mean, Lotus Black came out to play, and it was just a really solid day for them. 3-0 matchup puts them at the top of the rankings at this point, tied with DAO. Now, remember, DAO did not play last week. Well, I guess they won all 3 games because their opponents forfeited. So they are 3-0 coming into the split, but this is going to be the first games that they have actually played moving into week number 2. Another thing that we want to point out, kind of looking at, what we saw, with Common Taco talking about, what he was able to do in that top lane against Degenerates, put him on the high stat points in terms of, getting into that MVP ranking, but it's actually a player from Zenigma Eclipse Halo, or HA10 or whatever. I say Halo, but yeah, Halo at the top of the list for MVP right now, playing exceptionally well for Zenigma, and that was the team that VBU Neon played against last week. But we don't want to count out VBU at this point. We haven't seen Divine Ascension play this split yet, so I think that there's definitely going to be some room for both of these teams, I think, to actually have a really good week. But we got to find out, how they're actually going to be able to play out. VBU, I was talking to their captain. I was talking to Coley, the captain, earlier this week, talking about week 1, how they were feeling. This is their first split here at XLNC in the Light League. They've had a couple of other different teams across kind of like the gold level through VBU, but this is the first time in XLNC. Coley was feeling pretty confident coming into last week, but he's feeling better this week because his team didn't really have an identity coming in to that last week against Zenigma. So definitely feeling a lot better, building more of that identity, and wanting to be able to keep themselves in the running for that top 5 or top 4, top 5 position. If they go 3-0, they could potentially be, rank 2, rank 3, depending on how the rest of the week plays out, or rest of the split plays out.
Yeah, 100%. And really, that's the joy of the early portion of a season. You can have one bad week, you can have one good week. You can be the benefactor of a team that isn't there and end up with a 3-0 without any stats for me to collaborate off of. But
Right.
I will say this on top of everything else, VBU Neon are going to have, as you said, a little bit more of an identity going into week number 2. Yes, there is a 3-0 across the rift from them, but they can feel a little bit more solid in knowing their roles and having a little more experience together. And you learn from your mistakes. You learn from each and every experience on the rift, or at least I hope you do, as you are growing throughout, potentially going from light into your medium leagues. I'm hoping that is exactly what we see from VBU Neon, because this could be a team that makes a full flip around and puts itself back at 500 or better.
Yeah, and so I mean, you said it correctly. Week number 1 was kind of where everyone was trying to get off of their feet, or trying to warm up, as it were, trying to get things going, trying to be able to keep things up and go from there. I definitely feel like there's a lot of opportunity for VBU to be able to perform well. And we, like I said again, DAO, they've been playing in the split, or in Excellency in Light League before. They've got a little bit of beef against Degenerates Ascension, as well, as I've heard from their captain Void. I talked to him. I asked him, I said, hey, can I get a quote for the fans? And you know what he told me? He said, DA is here to keep Degens down. So Big Sis, if you're out there watching Degenerates Ascension, definitely want to keep that in mind. But before we get into the draft, I want to talk about the power rankings coming out from week 1. Before we get started with game number 1 between VBU and against Divine Ascension, taking a look at where we're at. Lotus Black, I think, definitely at the top of that list. Rank 1 on the sheet, or on the rankings right now, 3-0. Central Sentinels can be going up next to him with Grim Reapers, and then Cape Dogs Unleash at rank 4. Despite not the best week for Cape Dogs, still being able to get that rank 4 in the power rankings. This is not the power rankings that I personally put everyone at. I still put Lotus Black in number 1, but I put Divine Ascension a little bit higher on the list. I put Cape Dogs a little bit lower on the list personally, and Degenerates I actually put at number 7. So, I mean, going across all the casters and everyone that had an input in it, I think that this is still a fairly consistent power rankings for the teams. I think that I agree with Lotus Black being number 1. They had phenomenal games against Degenerates last week, but this is definitely going to change coming out of this, coming out of week 2.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. The shame is, though, with names like the Tenacious Dolphins, I kind of wish that there wasn't a no-show in week number 1 there. Love what we saw out of week number 1, but again, those power rankings, borderline meaningless here after just 1 week. Yes, Lotus Black was very impressive on stream nonetheless. However, anything could happen any given Tuesday, and that's what we're here for. That's what we commentate for. That's why we are going to be bringing you all of the action here live from the Rift.
Yep, exactly. And that's going to be a ton of fun. It should be about ready now to jump into the first game here in just a couple of moments. Kendo, just before we get out of this one, any final thoughts? Anything you want to talk about? Anything you want to say before we get into that little bit of a break before we get into game 1?
I mean, I'm excited. I want to save as many of my points for draft and then talking about the matchup that we have coming up for just that. But I will say this, more than anything else, folks, it's going to be a lot of fun. And please be merciful on me, because we're a little bit of a beginner when it comes to behind the mic on the Rift. There aren't any balls with which I can hit around, or any Octanes or Dominus. Well, there is a Dominus. I do know that. I do know that if you rock the Croc, you will have a Dominus on the Rift, but not the same as the one I'm used to on the pitch.
That's for sure. And I'm glad to have you, man. I'm glad to have the style as well. It's going to be a ton of fun as always. Week number 2, Excellency Light League coming up in just a moment. We're going to take a quick break before we get into the draft, so stay tuned and we'll be right back.